So everybody can see my screen, correct? Yeah, I thought so. Just making sure. So I'm really excited to facilitate this conversation today. For those of you that don't know me, my name is Chris DaCosta. I'm the director of advising over at Rhode Island College. And I too have had the urge, like most of us, to really crave that sense of community and connectedness. I started my new position right at the beginning of this whole pandemic situation in March. So there's definitely been some challenges that I've engaged with and some successes as well. So I'm looking forward to sharing those and hearing from everyone here. With Nakata, I always look forward to this drive-in. As Lisa eloquently put, just being able to connect with everyone locally within our state. And looks like this year, a lot of people outside of our state, which is fantastic. So I'm really looking forward to hearing from everybody. As true facilitation goes, if I'm doing most of the talking, it's not going well. So I hope everyone in here is looking forward to contributing as well and posing questions and suggestions and thoughts throughout. I'm really excited. What I'm hoping to do is present a couple different forms of community and connectiveness. Obviously, always open to other ways beyond what I'm going to throw out there. But what I'm hoping to do is break us down into smaller breakout sessions, about 10 to 15 minutes, and then bring us back to the bigger group for about 5 minutes, and then repeat. So hopefully that format sounds good with everybody, and we'll get started. So when I first took a look at this discussion, I thought about 3 different categories. Community and connectedness can mean so many things, as we all know, but I broke it down to 3 areas with colleagues and students, programming and engagement, the campus feel sort of situation, and your own personal and professional growth, which sometimes can feel like sanity or insanity on certain days while we're all working from home. And if we have young kids that we're also homeschooling, or, my house right now is under construction, so I'm constantly working with electricians and plumbers and people coming in and out. So I thought we would discuss these 3 areas a little bit in a way to kind of have a little bit more structure to our conversation. But again, like I said, anything you want to throw in there, I'm happy to encourage. So Michelle, in a little bit, if you could break us down, it looks like we have about, was it 24 participants last time I saw, into groups of 6. I thought we could chat about these different prompts as starting points. And again, wherever your conversation goes, that's fantastic. So with colleagues and students, how are you and your office staying connected with, your advising teams, your other staff beyond your advising office? So, registrar, bursar, financial aid, other departments that you would normally have a really strong connection with, faculty and administrators, and of course, our students, the reason why we're here. So any challenges and successes you've experienced with this sentiment of being connected, and anything you've done differently in the last 8 to 9 months that you think you might continue with post-pandemic, whenever that may come. So if you don't have to necessarily, like I said, utilize these 3 prompts, I just want to give everybody a starting point. So if you guys could have that conversation over the next, let's say 12 minutes, Michelle, if we can do the breakout rooms for 12 minutes if possible, and then we'll come back to the larger group chat a bit before we move on to the next piece. So I'll let Michelle break us up into those smaller groups of 6 or so, and we'll chat. All right. So as people are trickling in, I thought we could take just 5 minutes or so before our next category to share what you had in your smaller groups to the larger group. Does anybody have any talking points that came up, whether it was a success, a challenge, an idea, something that they've done differently they want to continue with, or anything else? I know there's a brave soul out there somewhere.
We talked a lot about challenges. It's certainly been a challenging environment, but we had talked about how the sort of form of communication shifted mostly to email communication, particularly with our students, which can be challenging because in advising, that there's always a question behind the question.
Right.
And you can do a disservice to your student if you don't take it to the next level, to the next step. Definitely more challenging than things that we would like to continue in the future. But it was good to hear how other institutions and other universities are sort of also navigating the same challenges, so you don't feel so alone.
Great. Thank you, Sam.
In our breakout room, we talked about, I think most of our focus was on staying connected with our team. And we had talked about how at Bryant, we keep open a Microsoft Teams chat, although, I mean, any chat software would work really. We've got one for the office, and then I personally have one for the people I would normally have lunch with. So we're checking in pretty regularly around the day. It helps avoiding the feeling of disconnectedness. And then Devin from, I think, Mass Farm, sorry if I got that wrong, my notes are a little messy this morning, talked about how their office does an 8:45 a.m. Check-in Zoom call, which is mandatory. It's a quick 15-minute call for everyone in their office to just kind of touch base face-to-face. And while I don't know how that would work at every school, that sounds like an interesting way just to have that level of connectedness that you do lose when we're all working remotely.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that literal water cooler talk that you just have naturally it's tough to come by these days, right? Thanks,
sure.
Dustin.
You got it, man.
Anyone else want to share from their smaller pods?
In our group, we had talked about how we felt like within our own departments, we felt like there was still that good connectivity and being able to keep tabs on each other, either through like Teams or Zoom, but finding it harder to stay connected with the other offices on campus while not being physically on campus and being able to just like walk down the hall to pop into financial aid or the registrar. So that's been a little bit harder to replicate via virtual, and it requires a little bit more like patience and flexibility than maybe we would have on campus. But it was nice to see that like amongst our different institutions, we felt like within our fellow advisors and in our department, we still felt connected.
Right. That intentionality has become so much more important, especially with some offices. Well, all offices, we're all busy, right? But when you pop in for 2 minutes, it's almost like, okay, you're in front of me or you just called. It's going to take 2 minutes. I can get off the phone, but kind of committing to Zoom or having that Zoom fatigue, as Patrick mentioned in our last breakout session, sometimes offices can even shy away from that and makes it more challenging to connect for sure. Any other thoughts to bring back?
Yeah, we talked a little bit about the upside of working remotely. I would say, at least for me, I had never worked remotely, had that option prior to COVID. So it's afforded some flexibility that's been really nice. Granted, it's more than probably any of us want right now, but hopefully we'll still have that flexibility moving forward that we had never had before. So it could be a good thing. Hopefully just a little less of all this goodness of working remotely. So
yeah, and as a manager, I've had some staff members ask me, in a post-pandemic time, are we going to have the opportunity to work from home? And it's something that we'll discuss. I really do think there's an opportunity, maybe once a week or something. And each institution is different, of course, in terms of needs and things like that. But it is nice for your staff to have that opportunity to work from home and get laundry done during the day, or be able to actually take a lunch and not work through lunch constantly, and all those little things that give you a little bit more of an actual work-life balance. Today, it's a snow day, but right now my house is under construction, and I've had people, as I mentioned earlier, pop in to do different work, and it's just nice to be home for that and be able to answer questions and not get phone calls constantly and still get my job done, of course. But if I can step out for 5 minutes and just check in, or it's nice. So I think it definitely will paint a unique picture, a semester or two from now, hopefully, when we revisit those sorts of things. It's a great point. Any other final thoughts?
Yeah, I think it's interesting too how it's kind of changed how we've communicated with our colleagues. One thing I've noticed I've done is I'll at the beginning I was messaging, Dustin, one of my colleagues, and Kristen about the parenting aspect of working from home. No, that's not something you might normally talk about in the office, but during a pandemic when some of us are, we have children at home and we're trying to do work from home, we're trying to figure out that balance of helping them with their schoolwork that they're also doing remotely, and how does that coincide with our responsibilities working from home. So I found myself kind of asking them, like, hey, what are you doing at home? Like, how are you finding that balancing act? So I think it was interesting, kind of the opportunities it kind of created to talk with your colleagues about. And then also my wife, who's also in higher ed, she had her own meeting, so we kind of had an insight to what each of us do. So it kind of created that sense of a different kind of communication at home as well, because work is trickling into your personal life and vice versa, because that area of work and life balance is kind of grayed because of we're not leaving the office and going home, we're getting out of bed and going to work. So it was interesting to kind of get used to that. So when this is all done and we go back to our normal functions, we go to the office like we did pre-COVID, how much of those tendencies that we picked up on, or how much of those those routines that we got used to are going to carry over, and are we going to take kind of what we learned and kind of facilitate our face-to-face interactions at work going forward. As someone already mentioned, I kind of miss, and I know Chris, being a Brian, this, being able to walk down the hallway to the registrar's office, because it was quicker than a phone call, but it also allowed you to build the rapport with other offices. So, and I think especially if you're a new professional joining an institution, you've kind of missed that. You haven't been able to have as much face-to-face as you might have before COVID hit. So sometimes, I've been talking to some of my colleagues about how, the freshman class in particular, when we go back to being on campus full time and we start to meet those students who joined an institution at the beginning of the pandemic, we're going to be seeing some of those students for the first time face to face. So it'll be interesting to see how those connections have changed and how new ones will kind of go from there.
Yeah, and from my perspective, we've had 2 advisors start in September, and I started in March. So our office is very new. And one of the things that has been a huge point of our conversations is, for that newer staff, how do I connect with faculty more? How do I connect with departments and staff? And like you said, build the rapport, because you can have, we had meetings and set up during their first month. Oh, let's have a Zoom chat with financial aid, a Zoom chat with records, a Zoom chat with, you name the office, you name the person, you name the administrator, and then what? And, so we've been trying to be more intentional about, if a faculty member, if the director from community health emails me and says, hey, can we meet and just talk about our program a little bit? I'll say, sure, is it okay if I invite my colleagues? So we try to be intentional about bringing in or new folks into those discussions that maybe were more of a one-on-one or a phone call sort of situation, just so that we can see more faces and build more community for our newer staff, because it is a challenge. It's a tough one, especially if the areas that you're trying to connect with aren't reciprocating that because they're slammed, or or institutions gone through layoffs because of COVID. And so you have 6 people doing the job of 8 now. So of course they're trying to utilize their time really intentionally and efficiently and effectively. So it's a lot to juggle, for sure. One of the things someone was mentioning in our session was our students at the beginning of this, and how, again, each institution is different, but for their institution, how they were resistant to the idea of virtual meetings and discussions and things like that. And now here we are 8 months later, that it's kind of been it's going better and it's improved. And just the conversation around what is that going to look like when we are back in person, a place like Matt, where you're at, Bryant, that's 90% residential versus a place like mine that's 90% commuter. What are those students going to want to look for when they want to have their advising meetings? Are they going to want to have the choice of both in all likelihood, or is the advising office going to have more of a mission and have a more decisive decision, I should say, around what they want to do? And I think it all depends on what your students are saying, what your students need, what they're looking for, and the population of your institution. So any other final thoughts before we move on to the next piece of this? Okay, Michelle, I'll have you break us up again in a minute here, let's say for 12 minutes on the next tier of staying connected and community around programming and that campus feel that we've talked about, some examples of just walking down the hallway and talking to somebody, water cooler discussions, things like that. So we chipped into that a little bit, but what are some of the successes and challenges around some of your programming or general communications? What does your engagement level look like? What did it look like before the pandemic? And what does it look like now? Is there anything that you're doing right now that you think that you'll keep in a post COVID world? So just a few talking points again, but of course, let them go wherever they grow from, and we'll connect again in about 12 minutes. So Michelle, whenever you're ready, I appreciate it. Thank you again for facilitating these, and we'll be in our small groups again soon.
Is this our new group?
Okay, well, welcome back, everyone. Um, hopefully that session had as much conversation as my breakout session did. Anybody want to bring anything to the larger group about their successes, concerns, questions, thoughts?
I'll go ahead. So our group really discussed kind of like how to balance programming and promoting, services and availability against also, dealing with the fact that students have, quote unquote, Zoom fatigue and things like that. So it's like how to be accessible, how to be, available, how to have things like workshops and drop-in hours and things like that, but also like, be aware that some students are just kind of like at the end of class, like, that's good, I'm done.
Mhm.
So how to balance that. And we didn't really, have a full answer for that, but just something we've all kind of noticed.
And I don't think I necessarily have an answer for it either, but one of the things that I thought was helpful with the Zoom fatigue piece is for certain programming pieces to record them so that students can go back to them at a time where they are more well rested, can pay attention more. As I mentioned before, I work with non-traditional populations for the most part, caregivers or students that work full time, things like that. And when we had a nursing session for first year students, like a meet and greet, meet your advisor, meet the faculty, learn about the applications. There's a secondary application process, and all these things that they really should know from day one about sequencing, what can get them into the program, and basically eliminated after 2 semesters, all that good stuff. But we recorded that session. It was about 45 minutes. And we saved it to our YouTube page so that students can go back and look at it. Because even if they couldn't attend that night, yes, they couldn't go to the breakout room with their advisor and things like that, which, you can't always get everything out of a program. But they could at least go back and watch the YouTube clips about the application process, the expectations, who their village, who their faculty and staff are they can connect with. So it gave them a time where they could look at it on a Saturday night or a Sunday morning, Tuesday, what have you. So when you can record and share, I think that's been something that we've seen have some successes with and students have been appreciative of. It's got to be careful what you say in those recordings sometimes.
Or have good editing software.
That's right. That's right. Thank you though, Carrie, for jumping in there. Anyone else?
In our group, I mentioned the challenges we have with students' lack of engagement in our orientation sessions, that it's just so hard to get them interested. They're doing everything but orientation during orientation. They don't seem to dedicate that time like they would when it was on campus. So I'd love to hear any input on that. We talked about it a lot in our group and I got some good ideas.
Does anyone have a little notes of things that Bonnie could do for her orientation session to create more engagement? Anyone have that same obstacle? We talked about it a little bit in our session, so I don't want to be repetitive for Bonnie. Or how you create engagement around virtual orientation? Well, as everyone's thinking, one of the things that I shared with Bonnie in our small session was utilizing our student leaders a little bit earlier in the process, where in the past we were sprinkling them in throughout orientation for, bingo nights or get to know your major and things like that. But what we're doing this spring go around compared to the summer, which was obviously our first stint going fully virtual, is to have students talk about expectations about orientation. As your orientation leader for the virtual model, here's what you can expect. Here's how you want to dedicate your time, how to prep for your advising meeting, how to navigate the involvement pieces, the assessments, and basically kind of just almost like having a guide. I jokingly will say it's almost like the paperclip guy you have on Microsoft Word, just this person right from the get-go that if you have questions you can connect with and feel like you're engaged to another person as well in the campus community. So utilizing our orientation leaders was something that in the first go around, it was more of a afterthought because they also were dealing with, you know, pandemic woes for the first time, right? So they weren't sure about their level of commitment they could give and training and things like that. But now as student leaders, they're craving it and they want to connect more. So we're leveraging our student leaders.
I wanted to say, thinking back to orientation at Bryant University where I work, we typically register a group of students live in a classroom and walk them through the curriculum and what they have left to register for their classes. And we can walk around and help them troubleshoot, but on Zoom, that's very burdensome. So we thought about doing online modules ahead of time to educate them on as much as we could so that when we did have them in front of us, we'd have more time to troubleshoot. So that did require a lot of planning on my colleagues, but it's something that we're actually looking forward to using in the future, even when we do orientation in person, because they're able to have more information ahead of time and make more intentional, ask more intentional questions, whether it be related to their major or getting involved on campus during a time that they're already on information overload from so many other offices.
Thanks, Doug. Appreciate it. Any other thoughts or suggestions before we move on? Alrighty. Well, you know, we have about 15 minutes left or so, so we'll jump on to that third tier, which is, oh, I just realized I'm not sharing. Here we are. Which is our personal and professional growth. You know, we've talked about a little bit in our small breakout rooms and as a whole, when you have, you know, new hires versus staff that have been in a routine for a longer period of time, balancing things at home, you know, all these things come up. So as the standard in higher ed, always paying attention to burnout and work-life balance and all those things, what have you done, you know, just to reflect a little bit, and what have you learned over the year? What does mentorship look like to you, whether it's as a mentee or a mentor? Who do you go to when you have moments to vent or to talk or to be constructive about some of the concerns that you have, not just the vent sessions, right? And how are you balancing your day-to-day while working from home? And if you haven't been able to get there yet and it's still a work in progress, that's okay too. So just thinking about in terms of connectedness and community with ourselves and what we're doing to find the personal balance as well as professional camaraderie development and still helping encouraging our staff and ourselves to grow. So I'll turn it over to Michelle to divvy us up in those small groups one last time. Let's say 10 minutes for this one, and then we'll wrap up a little bit after that. Thanks, everyone. But anybody want to bring anything back from their larger group that they shared, whether it was about their office culture or their own professional or personal growth during the last few months, or a challenge that they want to chat out?
Yeah, our group just kind of talked about, oh, Kristen, why don't you go first?
No, you go first. Well, I was just gonna say our whole group kind of agreed that the boundaries between, especially when we're working from home, like the boundaries of the workday are non-existent, and they just work bleeds into evenings and weekends, and there's an inability to stop. That we find it, well, some of us find it more difficult to put the email away when it's a colleague. Some find it more difficult to put the email away when it's a student, because we feel that everyone is experiencing so much stress and difficulty, and we want to help, which is why we do what we do. So we're here to help, but sometimes we need to help ourselves. And that we also said that sometimes it's a lot easier to look outward and say, and I know I say this on the daily, Carrie Chernoff, put that email down and go do something fun. But it's a lot harder to say that to yourself and to establish the boundary. So, you know, it's just time for us all to be a little kinder to ourselves and you know, take a break.
Kristen,
Yeah,
well
you
said.
literally took the words out of my mouth. No, you took the words out of my mouth. But I was just gonna say, I was telling my group, like literally I put away my laptop and any work items off my desk and put it in my like bag, just to kind of take that out of my mind because my office is in my living room, so it's always there. So yeah.
A little tactic that I shared with my group, whether it's expectation setting with your students or helping that colleague, like you jokingly said, Kristen, with Carrie, not check their email, but realistically, there are nights or weekends that we do jump on, even if it's for a little bit, right? But one of the little functions I've used in Outlook is if I am on my email after dinner for a second, I'll, instead of hitting send, I'll use the send later function for 8:30 in the morning the next day. So if I do jump on my email on a Saturday, for instance, and a student has emailed me, I don't want to respond and set that expectation that I'm available on a Saturday or, you know, what have you. And that helps me create balance too. So yes, I shouldn't be emailing on a Saturday. I'm not trying to pretend like I do that every weekend either. I definitely don't. I definitely shut off sometimes. But on moments that I am working outside the normal hours, I'll use that send later function so that the person I'm sending that email to, especially if it's a colleague I know that will struggle with not responding right away, at least it doesn't give them um, the temptation to respond that evening, you know. So one little thing that might have some positive results. Anything else?
One of our small group members, Amanda, brought up, Chris, I really appreciated the question about mentorship. I think that's something we need to have a bigger conversation about as an Akata group in this pandemic time, because one thing that I'm finding is the inorganic conversations and opportunities to meet people across departments or organizations just isn't happening as much. You know, these drive-ins are really special because now we're getting to see and connect with colleagues in different places. So it's really important. And Amanda is looking for a mentor as well. And I think we definitely encourage the session later to connect with other new folks in our profession, and hopefully some other folks who may be looking to mentor will join that session and be able to connect. But I think I don't have, you know, my contribution to that is I think that was just a really aha moment and a great question, and something I've just been thinking about is, especially for my new team members who aren't getting to meet people organically throughout our campus or across departments, how can I be more intentional about pulling them in or virtually introducing them and creating those spaces for others?
And you know what, Pat? Sorry, Patrick just spoke, so I had Patrick in the mind. Devin, I'm going to put my email in this chat. Anyone that wants to toss me an email and have a discussion around mentorship, maybe we can bring a few folks to a virtual table after the holidays and just kind of have a conversation around it. So if anyone that's interested, I don't mind organizing something. It's a great point, especially for our newer folks. You know, as I mentioned earlier, I don't know if it was in a smaller session or a larger one. We just hired 3 people in the middle of a pandemic, so they're craving those things too. Well, I'll be respectful of everyone's time, so we'll be starting a new session, I think, in about 10 minutes. But before we log off, any other final thoughts or questions or things to bring up before we sign off here?
I just want to add real quick, I'm going to paste the link for the lunch discussion in the chat. So if you want to like eat lunch with everyone and just kind of, you know, chat about everything going on so far, you know, feel free.
Thank you, Matt. Appreciate it. All right. Well, I hope everyone